This is Saturn Girl. Like this video and subscribe to my channel. Comment below because I want to know what you think. And it helps me out with the algorithm. Do me a favor and also click the bell and select all so you can be notified when my videos drop. And my videos are the best. Well, anyway, this is another fun edition of my transit videos where we talk about a transit, what it means in general, and what it means for you. And we're going to do some fun little horoscopes for this particular one. Well, what's going on? November the 4th, Saturn, our wonderful daddy, is going to station direct in Pisces after being retrograde since June 17th. It feels like everyone's been retrograde, doesn't it? And then slowly turning direct. We've had Mercury, we've had Venus, we've had Pluto, and now Saturn, and next Jupiter in December. Isn't this fun? Well, what does it mean for you, for me, for us? Let's take a look. Well, at first we're going to talk a little bit about what retrogrades mean. Then we're going to look at Saturn retrograde in a natal chart. And then we're going to look at some past events that occurred while Saturn was retrograde. And then we'll do some fun little horoscopes for you. Right? So anyway, I'm in a very Saturn mood right now. So you have to bear with me because I'm not very fun to deal with at the moment. I've been giving people lots of harsh advice. And I'm also a terrible hypocrite. So, do I follow any of it myself? I don't know. Let's see. So, well, first of all, what are retrogrades? Because direct means that Saturn was retrograde, right? Well, retrograde motion is when a planet appears to move backward through the zodiac as seen from Earth, upon the backdrop of the fixed stars. Not the broken stars, the fixed stars. Boom. That never gets old to me. You see, we know that planets don't move backwards in reality. They all orbit the sun in the same direction, but at different speeds. Saturn is much slower than the Earth. So when the Earth approaches a conjunction with him, he will appear to slow down, stop, and go in reverse. It's sort of like he's, trying to make sure he got that roadkill. Go back. You know what I'm saying? Once the Earth Of course, planets still rise and set in the same direction from east to west, but if you were to watch them over multiple days, you'd notice that it looked like they were backtracking through the zodiac. Yes? Once the Earth overtakes Saturn in terms of the orbital journey around the sun, yes, then he'll appear to go direct again in the proper direction. For more detailed information about retrogrades and what they mean, you can watch plenty of my other videos, right? Including my live about retrogrades. Please go check it out. I have wonderful information in that, and we do it in detail. Well, moving on. What do retrogrades mean in astrology? Well, retrogrades indicate a planet slowing down, stopping, and going backwards, right? So it seems natural that they mean things like delays, reversals, and unfinished business, right? So Saturn retrograde is sort of a reflective time where we evaluate the nature of our achievements. We ask ourselves, how well did we build? We consider how much effort we had to put into things. We are often faced with our failures. And we can use this as a time to redefine our goals and our direction. So when Saturn stations direct, however, it's a time for us to resolve to do better, to apply more effort, to get to work, and to make something real in substance, yes? This is when we begin to build again. If we haven't cultivated any sort of optimism or excitement around our goals, we're going to have a bad time, aren't we? Now, people who have Saturn retrograde in their natal charts do have some distinct characteristics. You see, Saturn is about boundaries and barriers, isn't he? And Saturn retrograde people, like me, I have Saturn retrograde in my natal chart. And Saturn retrograde people often push through those barriers, right? Defy convention and challenge power. I'm thinking of people like Vladimir Lenin, who had Saturn retrograde, one of the leading people behind the Russian Revolution and the proliferation of socialist ideology, right? He challenged the fundamental political structure of Russia, which was the Tsar. It was essentially a monarchy. Well, there's also Aleister Crowley, also with Saturn retrograde, or Crowley, Aleister Crowley. I think the proper way to say it is Crowley. Right? I mean, OTO people will get all pissy with me if I don't say Crowley. Crowley. You know, those uppity OTO people. They're so licentious until they have to do things. I'm kidding. Well, what did Crowley do? He was known as the wickedest man in the world, wasn't he? He defied religious conventions with occultism, social conventions with his behavior, and sexual conventions, right? Because he was quite licentious. He was an open practitioner of sex magic and an avid drug user. Talk about conventions, bulldozing them. Now, in terms of boundaries in relationships, we notice that people with Saturn retrograde often don't have any. We're very good at appreciating and respecting other people's boundaries when we don't even know what ours are, right? And I think of people like Gwen Stefani, right, who was completely infatuated with her boyfriend, who Tony Kanal, I believe was his name, who was a bandmate in one of her earlier relationships. And we also see Megan Fox, right? And she famously let Machine Gun Kelly put a ring on her finger that would have really hurt her if she tried to take it off. I think there was like an internal mechanism that would... Anyway, I don't want to explain in detail because it's not fun, right? And we often see codependency issues with these type of folks. Like me! I spent a lot of time establishing boundaries and separating myself from the anxious attachment, which is so characteristic of Saturn retrograde, right? Well, also, Saturn is established power, isn't he? And we'll see people who passionately work to usurp power. I'm thinking of someone like Joan of Arc, right? A 15th century woman and Catholic icon who fought for France during the 100 Years' War and was very, very adamant that Charles VII had to be crowned King of France. This would have been the reestablishment of a Catholic dynasty. Well, Saturn is also a restriction, isn't he? So Saturn retrograde people often, we'll see Saturn retrograde people value freedom and equality, usually. So I'm thinking of people like Eleanor Roosevelt, who authored the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is still such a foundational and important document. It's seen as one of the main exponent of the values of the United Nations, what it was erected upon, yes? Or I think of Thomas Jefferson, who wrote a great deal about freedom, including the Declaration of Independence, right? Now, he wrote a great deal about freedom and equality while also owning slaves. So, wonderful hypocrisy there, but it's the double standard. Don't point it out. So, now, who else do we see? You see, the lesson here for a lot of us with Saturn retrograde is about letting things go. It's just an unfortunate lesson that we have to learn. And everyone has to learn it in some degree or another. Well, but what does Saturn retrograde mean for us in general? Well, we see established power structures turned on their heads. We see governments toppled. We see the erosion of borders or boundaries. We see powerful figures take a fall, don't we? We see despots overthrown, and we see the rise of new despots taking over. Well, what kind of events then align with Saturn retrograde? You see, Saturn was retrograde at the beginning of the American Revolution, during the Battle of Lexington and Concord. What did that do? It turned the monarchical order on its head, didn't it? It was a big challenge. And then at the beginning of the French Revolution, at the storming of the Bastille, Bastille Day, right? It's July 14th. And I think it was 17 or 18, or I can't remember. 1789? Anyway, the Bastille was a prison and an armory, right? And basically storming it was very symbolic also of the decline of that monarchical power once again. Saturn was also retrograde in 1917 when Tsar Nicholas abdicated his throne. That was just after the February Revolution in Russia. We were just talking about Vladimir Lenin, right? Now, Saturn was also retrograde when Adolf Hitler declared himself Führer, or dictator. I don't know how to say that word, Führer. Führer, or dictator of Germany. And that was August 2nd of 1934. Well, but this time, while Saturn was retrograde, we saw Donald Trump get repeatedly indicted, didn't we? And this is a reversal of power and also represents abuse of power because he tried to usurp the 2020 election, allegedly, right? And this will be played out in court. Allegedly, we have to say. And then we had far-right Republican Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, get removed from his post so that Republicans could elect an even further right Speaker of the House. Someone who, his name is Mike Johnson. He wants to make gay sex illegal. He wants to make me illegal. I mean, they've said as much during their podcasts. Him and his wife had a very disgusting podcast where they said very disgusting things, I love when Christians say, love your neighbors, you love yourself. And then they go and preach hatred towards their neighbor or want to illegalize the identity of their neighbor. Pretty scary stuff. Andrew Tate was indicted on trafficking charges, right? Which is a reversal and an abuse of power. I mean, he was abusing his power. On that same note, Danny Masterson, the famous actor from that 70s show, was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison for 2 R words, right? You know what the assaults, R words, you know what that word means? 2 of those that he committed in 2003. Ugh, awful. Well, and then podcaster and former actor, probably former because no one would hire him, Russell Brand is accused of, once again, the R word, and abuse by 4 different women after an investigation is conducted by the Sunday Times and Channel 4 in the UK, which are pretty reputable news sources. And then far-right former Brazilian president Jair Bolsonaro was barred from office for 8 years after he is found guilty in court of abusing his power. You might remember they had their own sort of January 6th thing down there where people sort of rioted and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, besides that, Israel launched its biggest military operation in 20 years in the West Bank at the Jenin refugee camp, killing 8 people and injuring 100 more. I wrote that down as an abuse as well. So, and I'm mentioning that sort of thing so we recognize the context of what's going on right now. And I've been called all sorts of nasty names for bringing up any sort of context about anything. But I'm used to nasty names. Point. Once again, I'm in a Saturn mood, so bring it on. So, where was I? Oh yes, Meta! Meta, right? I mean, it was Facebook, now it's Meta. It's so meta. Ooh, baby, Meta's a place on Earth. Sorry. Well, Meta launches Threads to compete with Twitter or X or whatever. I always forget to call it X because it just seems so silly. Because when I think of X, I think of other things. You know? So, but, you know, this was a reversal, wasn't it? Elon Musk threatened to sue Meta over this. Now, Meta hasn't overtaken Twitter as a more popular platform, but it's definitely poised, right, to be in such a place because Elon Musk is running Twitter, X, whatever it is, running it straight into the ground. Even though they have a new CEO, he's still having a deleterious effect on everything, isn't he? Now, some interesting things from me. The SAG-AFTRA strike began, right? This was a challenge of commercial power, of movie studios and executives, producers, who basically threatened actors and writers, right? To basically use AI and say, dismiss them. But eventually SAG-AFTRA reached an agreement. So this is very cool because it represents the rise of the labor movement once again, challenging conventional authority and established power. And my favorite part of this is when the United Auto Workers, right? The United Auto Workers Union, or the UAW, went on strike for the first time in its history against all of the big 3 auto manufacturers. That's General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, who does Jeep, right? So Jeep plant they were. Jeep. That they were demonstrating out of, or striking out of. And you see, this is reversals. Sean Fain. I do like him. Sean Fain, he's the president of the United Auto Workers Union, and he's an absolute boss. He's my president. Anyway, I'll talk more about him later. Because I like him. I think he's amazing. Well, and also the Barbie movie. I cried so hard during the Barbie movie. It just reminded me of all the times, you know, that I let people do things to me. And anyway, everyone should watch it. I think everyone should watch it because it's about identity also. It's about who are you and how and why, right? For those of you who had seen the movie. But anyway, the Barbie movie surpassed $1 billion, billion with a B, globally. And director Greta Gerwig is the first solo woman director to ever do it. Barbie became the highest grossing global film. surpassing Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Take that, J.K. Rowling. Anyway. Now, what about when Saturn goes direct? Some things I expect to see or I anticipate, right? Well, we see new structures become the establishment, don't we? Sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. We often see established powers fight back, or we see them retreat, right? Like the Empire Strikes Back. Think of Saturn direct as, as the Empire Strikes Back. Yes. We'll see new rules, new borders, and new boundaries. We'll also see retribution, backlash, and punishment, typically for challenging the status quo during retrograde, right? We see splintered groups reemerge with greater cohesion, don't we? We see groups and nations begin to assert new ideologies. Well, what sort of events do I anticipate or expect to see now that Saturn is going direct? Well, number one, the country Yemen recently declared war on Israel because of the conflict in Gaza. And they've been launching missiles and other things at Israel. And I think we'll see more Middle Eastern nations joining in. Now, the other interesting thing is, according to the Associated Press the other day, over 9,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, with over 3,600 of them being children. As a parent, I don't support that. I support an immediate ceasefire. If that makes me unpopular, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I'm a parent. I don't believe in hurting children. I don't believe in that. I think we should save the children and protect the children. I don't condone anyone ever hurting children, including Republicans who don't want to pay for school lunches and want to allow child labor and lower the age of consent. I'm in favor of children's freedom and protecting, like some other wackos. So, I talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict in a different video, my Pluto Direct video if you're interested. I go over some of the history very briefly. Now, I think we'll also see the results of an actual police investigation into Russell Brand's misconduct, aka the R word. I think we'll see the Republican Party come back from its divisions, stronger than ever and probably more hateful than ever. And that scares me because they don't like trans people. I think we'll also see the Democratic Party begin to splinter more over the situation in Gaza, right? A State Department official resigned over how the Biden administration was handling it. So I think we're going to see some stark division in the Democratic Party. Now, another thing about the Democratic Party is progressives, the Progressive Caucus, the Squad, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, and some others. They've been challenging the hegemony of AIPAC. For those of you who know what it is, it's basically a lobbying group. And this is a very big deal because AIPAC is very powerful and they typically run, they spend lots of money to force out candidates they don't like, that don't play ball. And I think we'll see more, of this because remember, established power like AIPAC sort of gets weaker. Well, on the other hand, we're also seeing the labor movement growing in power, as I previously said. And remember, I talked about Sean Fain, my president. He's so dreamy. When a man like that just stands up fearlessly for principles and for other people. It's, oh my gosh, he's so dreamy. What a man. What a man. Anyway, Spain announced that he and other organizers are planning a general strike across multiple industries for 2028. This is very exciting. It's very, very, very exciting. You don't understand how big of a deal this really is, or how big of a deal it could be. But we won't get into that too much. Well, what does this mean for you in particular? Remember, Saturn retrograde is a time to reevaluate how we did and to resolve to do better. It's a time to find what doesn't work for us anymore and to let those things go. It's a time where our assumptions, our patterns, and our traditions are challenged, and our illusions are often shattered. Illusions shattered, right? So that means when Saturn goes direct, we often begin a new program. We apply new structure and discipline. And the thing that Saturn teaches us is that self-discipline is what? It's freedom. If you can't discipline and master yourself, then you're not free. You're left at the whims of desires and conditioning. We also have new rules or boundaries after these realizations, yes? We apply renewed effort and get results. So, now for you specifically, the house that Saturn is transiting, for you in your chart, your natal chart, will tell you about the area of life that is undergoing an agonizing reappraisal. So we're going to do some brief horoscopes, aren't we? Now, for Aries Rising, that means Saturn is in your 12th house, or was retrograding your 12th house, of isolation and mental illness. So the last 5 months or so may have been about escaping that isolation. Maybe you reconnected with people or tried to be more social. It's likely you realize that the isolation isn't all bad. Maybe it's helped you sort out some of your priorities. And if it hasn't, give it time, because it will, unless you go on resisting. Maybe you've had to let go of people in your life, or you've had to let go of bad habits that alienate you from others. And now it's time to discipline yourself, as I said, because that's freedom. And see your isolation and seclusion as necessary to find out where you should be putting your attention, what is important and what you should focus on. Okay. Oh, I should be doing this on the chart, shouldn't I? Well, let's take a look really quick, because you see Saturn stationing. And then Saturn stations direct right there at 3:48 a.m. Mountain Time. Tomorrow. I mean, I'm filming this on the 3rd, but you're not going to see it till the 4th. So today, Saturn is direct. Yeah, but let's move on to Taurus Rising now. We're going to Taurus Rising. Taurus Rising. So anyway, that means Saturn is in your 11th house of hopes and friends. The last 5 months or so may have been, reevaluating what you want out of life. What are your hopes and aspirations? How have they changed? You may have realized that what was important to you before no longer is. You may have realized that what was important to you, you may have lost interest in things that used to captivate you. And as a result, maybe you lost some friends or support. Because now is a time for new hope for the future. It may feel like you have to do a lot on your own, but if you believe in what you're doing, other people will eventually as well. Like you got to let the dross or the dead weight fall away, so that people who could be very useful and who are enthusiastic about what you're doing offer some support. Well, now let's go to our Gemini Rising friends. This means Saturn is in the 10th house, right, of life direction and career. For the last 5 months or so, you probably felt like you hit a brick wall, right, with the path that you've chosen, or maybe the career that you've chosen. You probably got your hopes up for a new opportunity, and it crumbled before your eyes. Yes? You may have suffered embarrassment or a sense of immobility, like things aren't going the way you expected. This is probably confusing because every way feels wrong, right? There is no right way right now. Doesn't feel very comfortable. But now you can see that you need to take a different path for your fulfillment, right? This is the time to start planning and working towards new opportunities, right? So start getting your resume polished. You could see big movement in 2025 or 2026 as Saturn approaches Aries, where he's not happy, unfortunately. But let's go to our Cancer Rising friends. Cancer Rising, which means Saturn is transiting your 9th house of beliefs and foreign cultures. So for the last 5 months or so, you may have gotten sucked back into your old ideology and worldview. We get very attached to the things we believe, right? Especially when we've held on to them since childhood. We've acquired them from our family or our parents. Something about the opinions and values you once held now seems repulsive. But it's no good just to reject something without having a more refined understanding to take its place. Rebel without a cause. You need a cause. You need a cause. You probably noticed that these old ideas weren't really yours, and you just merely had accepted them and adapted yourself to them. Now you've been challenged to let those things go, which can be very uncomfortable, right? Your worldview is becoming more nuanced, inclusive, and less rigid, right? Boundaries. Expanding boundaries. Well, how about our Leo Rising friends? Leo Rising. That means Saturn is transiting your 8th house of death, debt, and other people's resources. This may have been a slightly fruitful time for you, where you may have seen a bit of a return, or perhaps some good luck. Maybe there was a gain of some sort, or a bad situation temporarily got better. When Saturn goes direct, though, we get tested on loss. That's what this transit is about, Saturn in the 8th house. It's about learning to deal with loss. A big lesson here is easy come, easy go, right? Especially with money. We're learning how to let things go and to not get too attached, and to at least recognize our attachment when we can't do anything about it. Anyway, how about Virgo Rising? For our Virgo Rising friends, Saturn is touring the 7th house of relationships and partners. Over the past 5 months or so, you may have rekindled an old relationship, or put more effort into a current one, trying to make it work. We find ourselves falling back into patterns, maybe being too agreeable or trying too hard to satisfy other people, so people pleasing. You're probably realizing now that this hasn't been working for you. This phase, with Saturn going direct, is about learning independence. Because if you're looking for external validation, you're going to have a bad time. The lesson here is learning to be our own home, right? Not look for it in other people. Well, what about our Libra Rising homies? So for Libra Rising, Saturn is touring the 6th house of illnesses and obligations. The past 5 months may have been a brief repose from that sense of toil. We often take a break or avoid things that we need to do entirely. I bet you've been procrastinating. It felt good at the time, didn't it? Right? Now, reality is forcing its way back into your life. And I bet you're stressed out and overwhelmed about it, aren't you? The lesson here is to cultivate responsibility and consistency, and to follow through on your duties. I'm not saying don't have fun. I'm saying don't have fun till you get your shit done. You feel me? Yeah? Anyway, what about Scorpio Rising? Scorpio Rising, friends. This puts Saturn in your 5th house of children and pleasure. The past 5 months may have been nice. I mean, maybe you got to do some fun things. Maybe your kids were less of a pain in the ass, right? Reversals. It probably felt like things were a bit calmer, and it was easier to enjoy yourself. But now the chaos begins again, and it will feel very hard to get organized and to focus. Feel like ADHD kind of thing. The lesson here is to stop crying about how things are and to face them while also still finding some enjoyment. Because if you can't enjoy life, what's the point? There is no point. I don't want to hear about all that toil nonsense. We're not Sisyphus. Well, anyway, what about our Sagittarius rising friend? Sagittarius. So this puts Saturn in your 4th house of origins and parents. Have you been feeling nostalgic lately or over the past few months? Perhaps yearning for the past or revisiting memories that you've nearly forgotten? It could be you got a gift from your parents in some way, or maybe they just shared some new information about your origins or your past. I see people often retreat back into tradition because it feels comfortable. I bet you started to notice, though, how those traditions and ideas don't actually even belong to you, and that we take them for granted, don't we? Now you're slowly being pulled away from the past and from tradition. You'll likely see that old ideas you've acquired from your background and conditioning are not only holding you back, but they're really cramping your style, right? We got to move on from those things. Let the past be the past. Well, let's talk about Capricorn Rising now. So for Capricorn Rising, this puts Saturn in your 3rd house of extended family, education, and your community. Have you been able to get out of the house over the past few months? Does it feel like you've been driving around more, doing more errands, right? Have you noticed any more progress in work projects or school? It's also likely that a sibling, aunt, uncle, or cousin has burst back into your life, for good or for ill. However, the likelihood now is that something will strain those relationships with extended family. The lesson here, though, is to take your time and not be consumed by rushing around. You need to be right here. Right here. Not over there. Well, what about Aquarius Rising? This is me and my homies. My fellow Aqua Risings. This puts Saturn in our second house of money, business, and resources. Over the past 5 months, you probably made some unexpected progress in your business, your job, or your finances. You may have had some modicum of success, which doesn't feel like Saturn in the second house, does it? But here we are. Did you get more clients, more revenue, or did you organize your work situation at all? I bet you felt more comfortable spending money, and we're less stressed about it. But if we don't want to have a rude awakening, we need to start saving and budgeting now. Especially me. Our capital, which includes our time and energy, our precious resources. And it's time to be responsible again. Responsibility. Well, now how about Pisces Rising? This puts Saturn in your first house, self. And this is such a wonderful phase, even though it's painful, isn't it? Because we're being forced out of these limiting conditions that really hide ourselves. The past few months may have been a nice rest from having to face inconvenient facts about yourself. Perhaps you slid back into familiar or comforting habits. This may have been nice for a while, but then you start feeling how defensive you become of these things that don't even help you. What an incredible waste of energy, isn't it? Now, we have to face things about ourselves that we'd rather not see and rather not deal with. We have to face our own mortality and to see our stupid conditioning, because we can't be more of ourselves when we buy into limiting ideas about ourselves. Right? I hope that makes sense. And thank you so much for watching until the end. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment below, and also click the bell. I want you to get notified when my new videos drop. And watch my other videos, because there's tons of educational information, and I'm pretty cute and funny. So there's that. Also, I do the best readings, right? It's science. All my information is below. You can email me, or you can book through my website, frankielynch.com. But most importantly, I love you. You're beautiful. And have a wonderful, whatever it is you're having.